and the end of her life was very sad. I mean, very sad in the sense that she
died of a broken heart.
She did in 1925. Yeah. We'll get to that. But we'll get to that later.
What killed her was the Civil War.
Yeah.
She was Irish to the last cell in her body.
Yeah.
The Civil War destroyed her.
Okay, we'll get to that in a minute. 1 second now.
The book we can download that book and you can just start quoting it now.
Now, these are two books. This is the one that you've referred to already a number of times. This is Catherine Everett's book called Bricks and Flowers. Now, she was a cousin of Lady Ardellan.
She was a Herbert of Muckross.
Actually,
Carnan House, a wing of the Herberts.
Okay. Now, she wrote this is her autobiography. Catherine Everett's autobiography.
It is autobiographical.
Yes. So, but in it she tells us about her conversations with Lady Ardellan around the burning of Macroom Castle.
Yes.
Now, who burned the castle?
The castle was burnt the day that Michael Collins was, do we say, killed, murdered, executed, whatever. The same day
departed this life.
Departed this world, this life. The 24th of August, the anti-treatyites had occupied Macroom Castle.
Yes.
And burnt it. It's well recorded in her cousin's autobiography. Yes. And of course, again we meet Nellie McNelly. Mm-hmm. Nellie cannot keep the anti-treatyites from burning the castle.
Okay, I'm going to read this passage here from Catherine Everett's book. Now this will just take a minute or two. And here she says, on page 176, if you can get your hands on a copy of this, do, by the way, it's a great read. During the Civil War period, we heard that Macroom Castle, Lady Ardellan's old home in County Cork, which she had inherited, was full of IRA, and almost immediately afterwards, rumour reached us that it was burning. When people had been born and have grown up in a house on their own land, where their forebears have lived and died for generations, they may feel not only a love for it, but a bond which ties them to every stone, tree and sod of the place. That was how my cousin felt. The day the rumour of the burning reached us was made more anxious and unendurable in that there were no railways, posts, telegrams or telephones functioning between Dublin and the south to confirm or to give us any particulars of the situation, remembering here that the Civil War was on at the time. There was no leaving Olive that night. She walked from room to room, wringing her hands and sometimes weeping and murmuring, "My place, my own dear, dear home." Then with rage she would add, "The brutes, if only I could get news." Now, Catherine Everett then decided that she would come to Macroom on behalf of Lady Ardellan and have a look to see what happened. And she describes very nicely here her visit, her travelling to Mill Street in the train, coming down to Carriganimmer and being stopped at a blockade in Carriganimmer, and then coming on to Macroom after that. Now, there is another piece here somewhere. You're going to have to get your hands on this. I'm sure there's a copy in the library here. But it talks about what she saw when she arrived at the castle. We might find that in a few minutes, Ted. But it was obviously Lady Ardellan had a great feeling for the place.
I mean, if we can introduce her letter here, dated the 23rd of January, she says, "I am the direct descendant of Cormac Lloydra McCarthy, born in 1411. That the castle, it has always remained in the possession of families allied by blood, except during periods of confiscation, after which it always came back to the McCarthys." And of course, we tend to forget that in the pecking order of Cromwellian and Williamite Ireland, those planters who grafted on to old Gaelic aristocratic stock were the bee's knees. Mm-hmm. So when Olive's people coming in as Cromwellian Protestants grafted onto the McCarthy line.
Yes.
They were the top gentry of County Cork.
Yes.
In Elizabeth Bowen's book, Bowen's Court, she points out that any gentry of Irish Catholic blood that were now Protestant looked down on the Cromwellians and the Elizabethans as newcomers.
Okay.
So that Olive was no upstart aristocrat. Olive came from deep lineage. Olive's ancestors were the lords of the Rock of Cashel, the Owenuchts.
And we're talking about the native Irish lords, in many senses, who of course were given titles afterwards during the plantations and before, maybe.
Well, Henry II began to dish out titles.
Okay, I'm just going to read this, just for continuity here with this, Ted. I'm just going to read this piece. Now, you say that Mrs. McCarthy in this book, that the name is wrong, that Catherine Everett's memory really is flawed in that regard. I
think Catherine is trying to protect John O'Sullivan's granny and not reveal. This is written in 1949. There's still residual resonating Civil War material.
So you think she makes up this name?
I think to protect the McNallys, she throws in McCarthy.
Okay, so effectively, while she says Mrs. McCarthy here, then we're talking about Mrs. McNally, isn't that right?
Mrs. McNally.
Mrs. McNally. Yeah. Okay, so anyway, when she arrived at the castle, she says the castle had always appeared to be a solid deep green from the ivy that clothed it with great twisted stems as thick as a man's thighs. Now it was rust colour. All the village seemed gathered around outside the castle, where furniture, china and pictures lay on the lawn or leaned against the trees, while policemen prevented the onlookers from going too near the smoking ruin. "Is Mrs. McCarthy here?" I asked. The policeman shouted, "Mrs. McCarthy wanted," and an elderly woman with a good, honest face appeared. "Her ladyship sent me," I told her. "She's broken-hearted about the castle." The poor woman burst into tears. "I couldn't stop their wickedness," she gulped between sobs. "When I saw them spreading tallow and paraffin everywhere, I knew what was in their black hearts." She paused. "Then it was I went in and tried to drive them out of it. 30 years I'm caretaker here, and you'll not burn it." And the answer I got was for one of them to strike the match in my face, which I struck out of his hand and put my foot on the light. "Carry the furniture first," I told them, and then I made them do, and that I made them do. And they, muttering and cursing and taking God's holy name at the delay, and all that was left was my own bits in my rooms, for by that time they had the top floor blazing. Well, I got her ladyship's things out, and Cromwell's cannon balls, for she laid great store on them. The next 24 hours were spent in turmoil. The furniture had to be put wherever shelter could be found, looting checked as far as possible, transport arranged to Cork, where I hoped to send it by sea, and intermittently poor brave Mrs. McCarthy was to be reassured and comforted. Isn't that a wonderful account?
No, very valuable.
And incidentally, if you can't get your hands on the book and you can't read it, this is I probably shouldn't be promoting this now because he's too close to me. My brother Barry.
I think all publications are invaluable.
Well, he has this has just gone into the shops, I think. It's number 10 of the Chronicles that he has written, and Lady Ardellan. He has a section, as it happens, on Lady Ardellan, and some of what I've just read is quoted here. And of course, there's a superb reproduction of a watercolour on the front cover. Now I'll just turn that then, Joe. There's the front cover, and you saw this earlier, Ted, so you were able to talk about this watercolour.
Oh, I think it's a wonderful watercolour. Can Donald Joseph, can you capture it, Dan Joe?
Yeah, he's getting it. He's fine. So you talk about it, maybe.
Okay. What's interesting here is St. Colman's Church of Ireland, the oldest building, definitely, that I know of.
Okay, we'll just stay with this, and then we'll talk about it afterwards.
This is taken from coming in from the west, from Kerry, over the 9-arched bridge, a medieval bridge, and on the right is the castle. Now, what's interesting about this castle is there's no tower, which now dominates Burke's garage.
Okay.
There's no tower there.
So that suggests what?
Oh, the tower was an embellishment in the castle was re-embellished, and a lot of the trees added to on the elevation of Victoria to the throne. Was it 1830?
1835, I think, but I'm not certain.
The Loyalists used to mark the 12th of July on the birth of King William of Orange on the 4th of November. But when the new monarchy came into being, there was all the loyal estates were embellished. But I think what's important here.
Let me take the book again, Ted, so that we can see it.
Yeah, the tower on Castle Street is not there.
Is not in existence.
It came later.
So that became as a folly, effectively.
A folly
to embellish the appearance of the castle.
Coming from the west.
Coming from the west.
Yes.
So what we now see coming across the bridge in Macroom, you tell me, is something that was built in the middle of the 19th century.
It's new.
It's new.
It is no part of the McCarthy Castle that Hedges Eyre purchased in 1707 from the Cromwellian Bank.
Okay, right. Now let's see if
but
we can.
But also, Jonathan Swift makes no reference to a third tower house.
Yes, and there were definitely two within the new building.
His Munster Travels 1723 is a very, very good description of the castle. It dominates, he says, the village of Macroom. So obviously at that stage we didn't have the Georgian 3-storey buildings on the square.
Yes.
There would have been 1- and 2-storey small houses.
Yeah, things would have been very primitive really at that stage.
Yes.
Now, Ted, we can't wrap this interview up without talking about the Church of Ireland in Castle Street, which Lady Ardellan herself had a hand in or an interest in. Can you maybe if I hold this up?
Yeah.
Here we go.
This photograph was taken by fortunately by a good camera owned by an assistant principal in this town in 1990. The day it was deconsecrated and physically handed over to the Urban District Council in Macroom. What is relevant here in this picture, firstly, is that the baptismal font in the foreground, according to the Reverend Brady,
yes,
whose son was interviewed in detail in the late 60s.
Yes, Stephen.
Mm-hmm. And it was through Stephen we know that this was the original font from the time of when it was a Catholic place of worship. And that it remained the same font down through all of the various Protestant rectors and vicars, starting with Richard Browne, the Reverend Richard Browne, who arrived, I think, around 1667 and had 21 children. He was the rector of Macroom. He built Coolcower House. And I would say every Browne in Macroom town is of the lineage of the Reverend Richard Browne. I'm told that by a number of people. Sir Harry O'Leary, the brother of Joan Cronin.
Yes.
Teddy and Joan Cronin. Hello, Teddy and Joan. They, very proud, Henry Browne, the haberdasher, the draper, they're very proud to claim lineage because there was no other Browne. Now, in a lovely book printed, The History of the Browns of Macroom, which is in this library for a reference book, it talks of another Browne family. Let me go back here. Carricknacarra Castle was granted by the Hollow Sword Blade Company, the HSBC company, now called the Hong Kong Shanghai Bank. It was granted to the family of Masters. And the Masters moved in to Carricknacarra Castle, which is now standing in Inchigeelagh, and they built Castle Masters, a 5-gabled mansion.
Yes.
Their daughter, Mary Masters, married one of the Browns of Macroom. But he died, and Mary died. Mary survived as a widow, childless, and married a second Brown with an E from Marmelan House in Cork City. Now, these are two different Browns. Anyone researching the landlords of Evil Eras or Inchigeela's 40,000 acres will find a John Brown and a Yeme or a Jemet, Jemmett, a Jemet. It's a male name, Jemet Brown. This is not to be confused in my research. There are two Browns at work. The major landlords with about 5,000 acres, the Browns of Coolcower, and then masters with their three daughters who married Pine, and their only son Stephen was killed coming out of Macroom Castle on New Year's Eve of 1799 to mark the end of the century.
Okay, now we've got to get back to Lady Ardellan.
Okay,
We've got to get back to Lady Ardellan.
Well, the relevance there is that the castle always endowed the local Protestant church.
Yes.
Each castle, each seat, in every barony in Ireland, in every parish perhaps, in Cork we've 119 parishes, there was always a landlord's seat.
Okay, so Macroom now is the one that's endowing the Castle Street one, I take it.
So the McCarthys,
Yes.
when it was a Catholic church, they're recorded in 1590 as the endowers of the church.
Yes.
And then Richard comes in after the Cromwellian period of 1667. But all the time the castle spent.
What was Lady Ardellan's connection?
This is where she worshipped.
Okay.
And if you look carefully at the plaques and the most beautiful stained glass, although it is in danger, much of the stained glass is slipping, I'm afraid to say. The plaques have been taken off the walls with two exceptions. The Reverend Brown's plaque of 1730 and Olive's sister Jane Gore, Lady Jane Gore, that's still on the wall, that's it there. So Olive's connection with this is this, firstly, where she worshipped, she spent on the castle, she brought in electricity.
On the church?
On the church, she brought in electricity. She laid down the beautiful Italianate caustic tiled floor. Now, it was in 1828.
We'll put this up again in a second. Yeah.
It was in 1828 that the apse, the extension to the altar, this was a wall here before 1828.
Okay, and I'm going to show that in a second.
It's called the apse.
So, Ted, you're talking here about this holy water font, which you've already mentioned.
It is
you're
safe.
You're talking about the
it
tiles.
It is still safe, yes.
The tiles.
Tiles were ripped up and poured into the crypt.
The tiles. And that was done when it was taken over by the Urban Council, unfortunately.
Unfortunately.
Yes. And you're saying that this was the end wall of the church
That
here,
was the end wall.
but that this section was built on subsequently.
And as the Reverend Brady used to say in the 20s, according to his son Stephen, the Reverend Richard Brown was buried originally 100 years earlier under the altar, but the altar didn't exist. There was a wall there.
That was outside.
Outside. So that now Richard Brown, lying under the altar, looks up. If you look carefully, this is a blue, starry firmament. In fact, the ceiling over the altar is the planets of the longest day of the year. What you can see from Macroom on the longest day of the year, St. John's Day,
21st of June,
are recorded. The planets, the sun, the moon,
okay,
and the position of all the constellations,
okay,
so that Richard may, on the day of the resurrection, he may rise and see the holy heavenly Arabian blue firmament with golden stars.
Okay, now we're going to have to wrap this up. Here we go. Now, I'm going to kick for touch with this, if I may. Lady Ardellan left Macroom, went to Dublin, lived in St. Anne's to a large extent, came to Macroom, as you've outlined.
Every Christmas.
Also went to Ashford Castle.
And brought gifts to the poor of the town.
Okay. And we know that we've got contemporary evidence here in this book to show how much dearly she loved the castle and loved the area. Now, after that then, her husband, of course, died, and she continued to live on, essentially in Dublin. She got her title from her husband, Lady Ardellan. And in fact, her married name was Olivia, at least her birth name was Olivia, not Olive, I think.
Olivia Charlotte.
Yes, Olivia. So
Yes.
there's a very nice passage that I've read. It's not in this book, but I've read it about the end of her days in St. Anne's Park in Dublin. We're calling it St. Anne's Park now because it's now a public park. By the way, you did mention that she had a huge interest in horticulture, and she developed. She developed. We know and mentioned already on local television the Ardilaun rose. And the Ardilaun rose is now planted in the grounds of McEgan College, presented by the Enterprise Board to the I suppose it's in there because they're in there for safekeeping, and they're just a beautiful old rose planted against the gable end wall facing the castle gate. Go and see it next summer. Go and see those next summer if you can. But Lady Ardellan, essentially her life was very sad after the burning of the castle.
Yes, I reckon she would have slipped into a sort of a manic depression. It was in the family. Remember, if you look back, cousins were marrying cousins.
Yeah. No, we're not.
And
going
there was an innate endemic depression. Her brother, the fourth Earl, died in a mental asylum. And now her castle was gone. She had signed over her castle in December of 1924. She was dead in a few months.
Yes.
So,
and I did read that towards the end of her life, that even the house in St. Anne's Park, although she still was relatively wealthy, her husband had given up his position as head of Guinness, had died at that, of course, subsequently. I think I read somewhere that had something to do with an objection she had to alcohol. Have you come across that?
She was in this town. She was in this town.
What is this
and
coming?
Her coach and six were heading, I was told, on Christmas Eve.
Yes.
And outside, was it the Widow Gould's?
Yes, keep going.
What was Penn's Hotel now?
Yes.
She saw a man, and she stopped her coach, and she asked her coachman, go over and, is that a dead man, or what's wrong with the man? And her coachman stood up, the poor man, and he dropped a big glass bottle of stout which smashed. And Olive then realised that all of the stocks and shares and great wealth of the Guinnesses had come through alcohol and was causing alcoholism. And within 1 week, Arthur had completely had sold all his shares, but Olive never drank. She had I suppose a fear.
Yeah, she didn't like alcohol, in fact. So
No.
she lived on then in St. Anne's Park for a
She
period of
lived on
time.
with-
The house kind of went into disrepair a bit, and we're told that in the winter months, when there were even leaking roofs there at that stage, she went to the Shelbourne Hotel with her maid and spent a lot of the cold winter there. And eventually, of course, she died in 1925. Now, there is a little bit of dispute about the date of her birth, I think. You are
Date of her
saying...
death or
Of her
birth?
death, I beg your pardon.
Death, it is the
Of her death.
13th of December 1925. We have that on the record from the castle housekeeper down to John O'Sullivan through his mother.
Okay, but in fact a lot of the printed literature puts it at the 13th of September. But in any case, this is the 90th year of her death, 90th anniversary of her death.
John O'Sullivan, who would have most knowledge
Yes.
on this subject and who's been very generous with his knowledge. He always has held, born 1850, the 25th of August, and passed over from this world on the 13th of December 1925. I wanted to add something else, Brendan, lest the people think we're revisionist, that we want to bring back gentry and we want to put Ireland back in under the crown, whatever. We're describing a period in Irish history that has been suppressed since partition.
And I wouldn't be sitting here if that were the case, by the way.
And tell me what is that?
Well, what I'm saying is I have no interest in bringing Ireland back under the crown, I assure you.
Oh, very, very good.
Yes.
I don't think Ireland will go that way.
We're looking at our history, really.
We're looking at our history, but we're also looking at that other Ireland that has been forgotten.
It parallels, I suppose, the Republican and the other side. But Ted, we're going to have to leave it. We really are.
Yes.
You have an event coming up on Saturday the 5th of December.
Next Saturday.
So you are going to honour Lady Ardellan on Saturday the 5th of December, next Saturday. How are you doing that?
Their favourite tree wasn't a native tree. Their favourite tree, Olive and Arthur, in all of their various estates in Britain and in Ireland, as well as in France, by the way. Mm-hmm. They had properties across Europe. They always planted the Quercus ilex, what we call the holly oak, or the evergreen oak. It resembles a holly tree, but it grows to a huge oak tree and it has acorns. Mm-hmm. And there is one left in Macroom domain, quite a mature one at the end of the rough. Mm-hmm. We're going to plant one of those, but also next Saturday is United Nations International Day of Soil, SOIL.
Yes. The
Earth's soil, which we will go back to, and everything we can see.
And I'm sure it will be suitably commemorated by you, Ted, but for now the emphasis is on Lady Ardellan. You're inviting the public to come along at 12 o'clock midday on Saturday the 5th of December.
Below the clubhouse on the 2-acre site that the trustees have loaned Conor O'Callaghan, the master's student in arboriculture, yes, and Buckley's son,
yes,
and myself have taken a letting of 2 acres and we're creating a native woodland in honour of Ardilaun. We started nearly 2 years ago, and that is our contribution to our memory, and I'm very pleased that we're in a position to recall Lady Olive Ardilaun. I do a lot of work in the north, Brendan, on cross-community work, and sadly it is believed that their memory has been, that the memory of Protestant Ireland has been swept away and buried and destroyed. Yes. It has not.
Well, I think there's more. I think there is more enlightenment now, and I think that since the commemoration, for instance, of the war, you know, where you could not have walked in the street with a poppy, for instance, wearing a poppy in the past. Now I think people want to honour their dead Irish people who fought bravely, and there is a kind of an opening up and a kind of a willingness to know the full story.
A maturity.
All right, thank you. Thank you. And with that very wise word there from Ted, I had no idea that this interview was going to last this long. Apologies to Denjo, who's going frantic over there because the batteries in his camera are going to run out, and that's the second lot of them. We probably will bring this interview to you in over a couple of nights because it is quite long. Maybe when you're listening to this, we'll already have done so. Fantastic store of knowledge in the head of Ted Cook. It's wonderful that he has this level of interest, that he is recording this history so thoroughly and so well, and we thank him for coming along and sharing it with us today.